The year was 1153, and the walls of Ascalon trembled under the relentless assault of the Crusader forces. Among the warriors charging into the fray, one group stood apart, not just for their skill in battle, but for the unmistakable red crosses emblazoned on their white mantles. These were the Knights Templar, the legendary warrior monks whose name alone struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. That day at Ascalon, their bravery turned the tide of the siege, securing a victory that would echo through history. But who were these men behind the myth? How did a small band of knights evolve into one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations the medieval world had ever seen? The answer lies in the leaders who shaped the Templars' destiny: visionaries, warriors, and strategists whose decisions rippled across centuries. From the battlefields of the Holy Land to the halls of power in Europe, these 25 figures didn't just serve the order, they defined it. Some were master tacticians, turning impossible odds into triumphs. Others were diplomats, weaving alliances that kept the Templars thriving long after other orders faded. And a few, their stories are so shrouded in legend that even now, we're left piecing together the truth. This is the tale of those 25 remarkable leaders, the minds and souls who turned a brotherhood of knights into an empire of faith and steel. We'll walk in their footsteps from the founding days of Hugues de Payens to the twilight moments of Jacques de Molay. Along the way, you'll discover how their choices not only shaped the Crusades, but left marks on history that still linger today. So ready yourself for a journey into the heart of the Templars' legacy, where every decision carried the weight of kingdoms, and every leader's story is a thread in the tapestry of the medieval world. The Siege of Ascalon was just the beginning. Now, let's uncover the rest. In the turbulent years following the First Crusade, the roads to Jerusalem were as dangerous as they were sacred. Bandits and raiders lurked in the shadows, preying on the endless stream of pilgrims who journeyed to the Holy Land. It was in this chaos that the Knights Templar were born, not as conquerors, but as guardians. The year was 1119 when a French knight named Hugues de Payens gathered 8 fellow warriors and pledged their swords to a singular mission: protecting the vulnerable travelers who risked everything to walk in the footsteps of Christ. Hughes was more than just a skilled fighter, he was a man of deep conviction. He understood that faith without action was hollow, and his vision transformed a small band of knights into something far greater. With a blessing of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, the group took up residence near the ruins of the Temple Mount, a site steeped in spiritual significance. This humble beginning gave them their iconic name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, later shortened to the Knights Templar. What set them apart wasn't just their bravery, it was their structure. Hughes molded the Templars into a monastic brotherhood, combining the discipline of a soldier with the devotion of a monk. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, living austere lives even as their reputation grew, but their influence didn't stop at the battlefield. Hughes traveled to Europe, securing the endorsement of the Church at the Council of Troyes in 1129. With papal recognition, the Templars gained something even more powerful than swords: legitimacy. Nobles across Christendom flocked to support them, donating land, wealth, and even their own sons to the cause. Within decades, the Templars evolved from a handful of knights into a vast network of fortresses, banks, and political influence. Hugues de Payens had planted a seed, but it would take the leaders who followed to nurture it into an empire. The stage was set for a new era of Templar dominance, one where their role would expand far beyond the dusty roads of the Holy Land. Hugues de Payens wasn't just a warrior, he was a builder of legacies. Born into nobility in the Champagne region of France around 1070, his early life remains shrouded in mystery, but his impact on history is undeniable. By the time he arrived in the Holy Land, he carried not just a sword but a vision, a brotherhood where faith and duty were inseparable. Those first 9 knights who joined him weren't merely soldiers, they were pioneers of a radical idea that protecting pilgrims was as sacred as prayer itself. King Baldwin II saw their potential immediately. In an act of extraordinary trust, he granted them quarters within his own palace, the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed by Crusaders to be Solomon's temple. This wasn't just shelter, it was symbolism. The Templars now stood guard over Christianity's most hallowed ground, a physical and spiritual fortress, but Hugues knew survival required more than royal favor. He spent years crafting the Order's first rule, a document blending monastic piety with military precision, silence in prayer, modesty in dress, absolute loyalty to the brotherhood. These weren't suggestions, they were commandments etched into the Templars' identity. His greatest test came not on the battlefield but in the courts of Europe. Traveling for 5 years from 1127, Hughes secured audiences with kings, bishops, and finally Pope Honorius II. His persuasion was so potent that by the Council of Troyes, the Church didn't just endorse the Templars, it gave them a sacred mandate. The papal bull Omnidatum Optimum in 1139, though issued after his death, crowned his life's work, granting the order independence from local bishops and allowing them to collect tithes directly. Yet Hugues' leadership was defined by paradox. He amassed political power while living in personal poverty, a dichotomy future Grand Masters would struggle to balance. His austere habits, sleeping in shifts to keep constant watch, eating meager meals in silence became the Order's spiritual backbone. When he died in 1136, likely in his 60s, he left no personal fortune, only a brotherhood poised to eclipse all other military orders. The challenges ahead would dwarf those Hugues faced. His successors inherited not just his rules but the weight of expectations. To defend a crumbling Holy Land, to manage vast estates stretching from Paris to Jerusalem, and to navigate the treacherous politics of kings and popes. The quiet knight from Champagne had lit a torch. Now others would carry it into storms he could never have imagined. Robert de Crayon stepped into leadership at a pivotal moment, inheriting a brotherhood still finding its footing in the chaotic landscape of the Holy Land. Unlike Hugues de Payens, whose legacy was built on battlefield courage and monastic discipline, Robert wielded a different kind of weapon, his sharp diplomatic instincts. Elected Grand Master in 1136, he faced a daunting task, transforming a revered but fledgling order into an institution capable of enduring the turbulent politics of both Jerusalem and Europe. His first triumph came just 3 years into his rule with the papal bull Omnidatum Optimum. This wasn't just a piece of parchment, it was a revolution. For the first time, the Templars could bypass local bishops, answering directly to the Pope. They gained the right to build their own oratories, bury their dead in consecrated ground, and even collect tithes. These privileges didn't just grant independence, they turned the order into a sovereign entity within Christendom. Robert's genius lay in understanding that survival required more than swords, it demanded systems. He formalized the Templars' financial networks, creating a proto-banking system where pilgrims could deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Holy Land, protected by the Order's ironclad reputation. This innovation didn't just safeguard wealth, it made the Templars indispensable to kings and merchants alike. Militarily, he expanded their role beyond escorting pilgrims. establishing them as a standing army with a chain of command so efficient it became the envy of European monarchs. Yet Robert's approach marked a subtle but profound shift from Hugues' austerity. Where the first Grand Master wore his humility like armor, Robert embraced pragmatism. He negotiated with nobles, smoothed tensions with rival orders like the Hospitallers, and even navigated the delicate politics of the Second Crusade. His leadership proved that the Templars could be both devout and shrewd, a duality that would define their future, but the sands of the Holy Land were shifting. As Crusader kingdoms faced growing threats, the Order's military prowess would soon be tested like never before. The next Grand Master wouldn't inherit an experiment in faith, he'd inherit an empire expecting victories. Everard despars arrived at a moment when the Templars needed more than piety, they needed a strategist. When he became Grand Master in 1147, the Second Crusade was already unraveling. King Louis VII of France, inexperienced in the brutal warfare of the Holy Land, leaned heavily on Everard's expertise. Their alliance wasn't just political, it was symbiotic. The Templars provided the king with something no European army could: local knowledge, disciplined troops, and a network of fortresses that doubled as supply depots. In return, Louis's trust elevated the Order's status, weaving them into the fabric of European power. What set Everard apart wasn't just his battlefield instincts, it was his understanding of war's true cost. As Crusader forces faltered during the ill-fated siege of Damascus, he made a controversial decision: strategic retreat. While others saw withdrawal as cowardice, Everard recognized that preserving the Templars' strength was more vital than a hollow victory. His ability to disengage without chaos saved countless lives and ensured the Order remained a fighting force long after the Crusades' collapse. But his most enduring legacy lay in ledgers, not lances. Everard revolutionized the Templars' financial systems, creating mechanisms so sophisticated they became the medieval equivalent of a multinational bank. He established letters of credit, allowing nobles to deposit funds in Paris and withdraw them in Jerusalem, a system that minimized the risk of robbery and made the Templars indispensable to European elites. These innovations didn't just fund the Crusades, they turned the Order into the financial backbone of Christendom. Kings borrowed from them, popes trusted them. Even rival knights grudgingly admired their efficiency, yet for all his brilliance, Everard's story took an unexpected turn. In 1152, at the height of his influence, he resigned. Some historians speculate exhaustion, others whisper of a crisis of faith. Whatever the reason, he retreated to Clairvaux Abbey, trading the clamor of war for the silence of monastic life. His departure marked the end of an era, one where the Templars had proven they could shape history not just with swords but with shrewdness. The next Grand Master would inherit an order at a crossroads. Bertrand de Blanquefort faced threats Everard never imagined: internal dissent, shifting alliances, and the rise of a formidable enemy, Saladin. The age of quiet strategy was over. A storm was coming. Bernard de Tremelay's name is etched into Templar history not for a long reign, but for a single, devastating moment of courage. Elected Grand Master in 1151, he inherited an order still reeling from the failures of the Second Crusade, a time when the Christian hold on the Holy Land grew more precarious by the day. Then came Ascalon. The coastal fortress, a thorn in the Crusaders' side for decades, became the stage for Bernard's defining act. In the sweltering summer of 1153, King Baldwin III laid siege to the city, with the Templars at the vanguard. The pivotal moment came when sappers breached a section of the wall. Bernard and 40 of his knights, clad in their iconic white mantles, surged through the gap only to find themselves trapped. Historians still debate whether it was a tactical error or a deliberate sacrifice. Some accounts claim the king ordered a retreat, but the Templars, bound by their vows, refused to abandon the breach. Others suggest Bernard believed a show of unwavering resolve would shatter enemy morale. What's certain is the horrifying aftermath. The gates slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. Every Templar inside was cut down, their bodies left as a grim warning. Yet Bernard's death was more than a military blunder. It became legend. In an era where chivalric ideals mingled with religious fervor, his willingness to die rather than yield embodied the Templars' highest calling. Poets and chroniclers transformed the tragedy into a parable of sacrifice, ensuring his name outlived the battle. Even Muslim chroniclers, who rarely praised crusaders, noted the Templars' fearlessness that day. The order, however, couldn't afford poetry. With ranks thinned and morale shaken, they needed a leader who could rebuild. Philippe de Millie, a seasoned warrior who'd actually renounced his title as Lord of Transjordan to join the Templars, stepped forward. His first-hand knowledge of the Holy Land's politics and his deep connections among both Crusader and local leaders made him uniquely suited to steady the ship. Bernard's martyrdom had shown the cost of zeal. Philippe's task was to balance that fervor with pragmatism. The Siege of Ascalon became a turning point, not just for the city's fall, but for the Templars' identity. They'd proven their willingness to die for their cause. Now, they'd need to prove they could adapt to survive it. Bertrand de Blanchefort took the mantle of Grand Master in 1156, inheriting an order still licking its wounds from the catastrophe at Ascalon. The Templars needed more than battlefield glory now, they needed reinvention. And Bertrand, a noble from the Languedoc region with a sharp mind for organization, proved the perfect architect for their rebirth. His first task, restoring discipline. The order had grown rapidly, but without Hugues de Payens' strict oversight, cracks had begun to show. Bertrand reintroduced rigorous training, tightened admission standards, and codified the Templar rule into something resembling a modern military manual. Every detail mattered, from the proper care of weapons to the exact phrasing of oaths, but his vision extended beyond the ranks of knights. Bertrand understood that survival in the Holy Land depended on strongholds, not just strong arms. Under his leadership, the Templars became master builders, erecting a network of castles that doubled as economic hubs and impregnable fortresses. Sites like Safed and Gaza weren't just stone and mortar, they were statements. Perched on strategic routes, these bastions controlled trade, housed garrisons, and served as early warning systems against encroaching forces. Muslim chroniclers marveled at their design, noting how Templar castles seemed to grow from the very rock, their concentric walls defying siege engines. Then came the test no leader wants to face. In 1157, during a skirmish near Banyas, Bertrand was captured by forces loyal to Nur ad-Din, the rising Muslim warlord. What followed wasn't just a prisoner exchange, but a masterclass in medieval realpolitik. Ransoming captured leaders was common, but the negotiations revealed the Templars' unique position. Unlike secular lords, the order had resources stretching from Jerusalem to London. Their wealth guaranteed Bertrand's release, but the price, reportedly the equivalent of a king's ransom, also exposed their growing influence. Critics whispered that the Templars had become too powerful, too entangled in the finances of empires. Bertrand's true legacy, however, lay in the systems he left behind. By the time he stepped down in 1169, the Templars operated with a precision that rivaled royal courts. His reforms turned them into an institution that could outlast any single leader, blending monastic devotion with bureaucratic brilliance. The next Grand Master would need that foundation more than anyone could have guessed, for as Nur ad-Din's ambitions grew, so did the shadows gathering over the Crusader states. The Templars' greatest trial yet loomed on the horizon, and it would fall to a new leader, Philippe of Millie, to steer them through the gathering storm. A man of both sword and diplomacy, his challenge wasn't just defending territory, but navigating a web of alliances where today's friend could be tomorrow's foe. The age of simple battles was over. The age of strategy had begun. Philippe of Millie wasn't just another Grand Master. He was a lord who had willingly traded his crown for a cross. Before donning the white mantle, he ruled as Lord of Ultra-Jourdain, a vast territory stretching east of the Dead Sea, where the air smelled of salt and the horizon shimmered with heat. His decision to renounce his title and join the Templars in 1166 wasn't just an act of piety, it was a strategic masterstroke. Here was a man who understood the Holy Land's politics from both sides, the throne and the cloister. His secular experience reshaped the order in subtle but profound ways. Where previous leaders had been monks first and warriors second, Philip approached the Templars with the mind of a feudal lord. He streamlined supply lines between castles, negotiated alliances with local Christian and Muslim factions alike, and, most controversially, clashed with King Amalric of Jerusalem over military strategy. The king favored bold, sweeping campaigns. Philip advocated for patience, fortifying strongholds, and wearing down Nur ad-Din's forces through attrition. Their disagreements weren't just tactical, they revealed a growing tension between royal authority and Templar independence. But Philip's true test came on the battlefield. In 1167, he led a daring raid into Nur ad-Din's territory, striking deep into Syria to disrupt supply routes. The campaign showcased his signature blend of audacity and precision qualities honed during his years ruling the frontier. Yet even his brilliance couldn't halt the tide forever. Nur ad-Din's forces grew stronger, and by 1169, Philip faced an agonizing choice: abandon the vulnerable fortress of Gaza or overextend the order's resources. His decision to withdraw, though criticized, preserved the Templars' strength for future fights, a lesson in sacrifice his successors would need desperately. His greatest legacy, however, lay in governance. Philip's reforms blurred the line between monastic order and feudal state. He established a council of veteran knights to advise on major decisions, a system echoing the baronial courts he'd once presided over. Under his rule, the Templars began issuing charters and treaties like a sovereign power, a shift that alarmed kings even as it bolstered the order's efficiency. When Philip stepped down in 1171, he left behind an order transformed no longer just a band of warrior monks, but a hybrid of military might and political savvy. The next Grand Master would need every ounce of that sophistication, for rising in the south was a figure who would redefine the fate of the Holy Land, Saladin. And waiting in the wings was Odo de St, a man as unyielding as the desert wind, a leader who would face the storm Philip had long foreseen. Odo de St wore his convictions like armor, unyielding, unpolished, and utterly unapologetic. When he became Grand Master in 1171, the Templars faced a threat unlike any before: Saladin's armies, fueled by a vision of uniting the Muslim world under one banner. Odo wasn't a diplomat or a politician. He was a blunt instrument of faith, and his leadership would be defined by one pivotal moment: the Battle of Montezad in 1177. King Baldwin IV, the young leper king of Jerusalem, stood with a skeletal force against Saladin's vast army near Ramla. Outnumbered and desperate, the Crusaders' only hope lay in the Templars' discipline. Odo, leading the Order's knights in a ferocious charge, shattered Saladin's left flank. The victory was miraculous, a rare bright spot in a darkening era. But Odo's triumph revealed his fatal trait, an inability to bend. Where others saw a chance to negotiate, he saw only surrender. When Saladin later offered to ransom captured Templars, Odo refused outright. To him, paying for their release would acknowledge weakness, a sin against the Order's vow of poverty and its militant pride. That stubbornness cost him dearly. In 1179, during a skirmish near Marj-i-Gun, Odo was captured. Saladin, remembering the Grand Master's earlier refusal to ransom prisoners, extended no mercy. Odo rotted in a Damascus prison, dying in chains, a martyr to his own uncompromising ideals. Historians still clash over his legacy. Was his inflexibility the backbone that held the Templars together in their darkest hour? Or did it blind him to the pragmatism needed to survive? The truth lies somewhere in between. Odo's defiance at Montezad bought the Crusader states precious time, but his refusal to adapt sealed his fate and left the Order reeling. As the Templars buried their leader, a new storm gathered on the horizon. Saladin, humiliated but undeterred, sharpened his plans for Jerusalem. The next Grand Master, Arnold of Toroja, would inherit not just Odo's mantle, but a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse. The question was no longer how to win, but how to endure. Gerard de Ridefort's name still sparks debate among historians. Was he a zealot blinded by faith, or a tragic figure undone by circumstances? His ascent to Grand Master in 1185 came at the most perilous moment in Templar history. Saladin's forces grew stronger by the day, and the Crusader kingdom stood on a knife's edge. Gerard, a Flemish knight who'd once served as Marshal of Jerusalem, carried a reputation for fiery rhetoric and impatience with diplomacy. These traits would soon push the Order toward catastrophe. The first warning came at the Springs of Cresson in 1187. Scout reports placed a small Muslim detachment nearby, an ideal target for a quick strike. But when Gerard led 80 Templars and a handful of other knights into the valley, they found not a raiding party but Saladin's elite guard, thousands strong. Common sense dictated retreat. Gerard saw only heresy to be crushed. The result was slaughter. Within hours, every Templar lay dead except Gerard and 2 others. His survival, some whispered, was divine punishment, forcing him to witness the cost of his recklessness. Yet he learned nothing. When Saladin besieged Tiberias the following year, Gerard convinced King Guy of Jerusalem to abandon sound strategy. Against the advice of seasoned commanders like Raymond of Tripoli, he urged an all-or-nothing march across the waterless hills of Galilee. The decision sealed their fate. At Hattin, under the relentless July sun, Saladin's forces encircled the parched Crusader army. Gerard's Templars fought with desperate courage, but tactics couldn't overcome thirst. By day's end, the true cross Christendom's holiest relic was lost, the king captured, and the Templar ranks decimated. Saladin's vengeance was swift. Most prisoners were ransomed, but not the Templars. Gerard watched as his brothers were executed one by one before meeting the same fate. His legacy remains a cautionary tale of how unyielding fervor, untempered by wisdom, can unravel even the mightiest institutions. The ashes of Hattin demanded a leader who could rebuild from ruin. Enter Robert de Sablé, a seasoned knight with ties to King Richard the Lionheart. Unlike Gerard, he understood that survival sometimes meant compromise. His task to restore an order that had lost not just men, but faith in its own leadership. The age of blind charges was over. The age of reinvention had begun. Terracus stepped into leadership like a man walking onto a battlefield littered with the bodies of his own brothers. The year was 1187, and the Templars were shattered. Hattin had not just been a defeat, it had been an annihilation. Of the hundreds who had ridden out with Gerard de Ridefort, barely a handful remained. Castles lay abandoned, relics were lost, and whispers spread that God had turned his back on the warrior monks. Yet in this moment of despair, Terecus did the one thing that mattered most. He refused to let the order die. His first act was sheer practicality, gathering the survivors. Knights who had been scattered across the Holy Land, squires who had fled with only their lives, sergeants who had watched their comrades executed by Saladin's swords, all were summoned to the coastal stronghold of Tortosa. There, amid salt-stained walls and the distant cry of gulls, Terecus rebuilt not just an army, but a brotherhood. He issued no grand speeches. His leadership was in the quiet reassignment of duties, the redistribution of what few resources remained, and the unspoken understanding that every surviving Templar now carried the weight of those who had fallen. Symbolism became his weapon. When he donned the white mantle, now a target as much as a badge of honor, it was a declaration that the order would not fade into shame. He secured papal reaffirmation of their privileges, a move that might have seemed bureaucratic but was in fact vital. If the Church still recognized them, they were more than fugitives. They were still Christ's chosen warriors. Even Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem months later couldn't extinguish that flame. Terecus shifted tactics, turning the Templars into a guerrilla force, striking from the shadows to harass supply lines and buy time for the Crusader remnants clinging to Tyre and Antioch. His tenure was brief, just 2 years, but its significance echoed far longer. Terecus proved the Templars could endure even when their world collapsed. He wasn't a visionary like Hugues de Payens or a strategist like Bertrand de Blanchefort. He was something equally crucial, a stubborn survivor. When he passed leadership to Robert de Sablé in 1189, he handed over an order that had been stripped to its bones but still had a pulse. The next phase demanded more than survival, it demanded reinvention. With the Holy Land slipping from Crusader control, the Templars faced a bitter truth: their original purpose was vanishing. Robert de Sablé's challenge wouldn't be rallying knights for a lost cause, but redefining what the order could become in a world where pilgrimage routes were closed and castles had fallen. The age of sacred warfare was ending. The age of adaptation was about to begin. Armand de Périgord's fate was sealed on the blood-soaked plains of La Fourbe in 1244, where the fading light of the Crusader states flickered against an unstoppable tide. The battle wasn't just a defeat, it was a massacre. Christian forces, bolstered by Templar knights under Armand's command, faced the combined might of the Ayyubids and Khwarezmians. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Crusader lines shattered like glass. Armand, fighting shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, was dragged from his horse and taken alive, a rarity for a Templar Grand Master, whose white mantle usually marked them for death rather than capture. His imprisonment became a microcosm of the Order's unraveling. Locked in a Damascus dungeon, Armand was more than a prisoner, he was a symbol. For the Templars, his captivity laid bare their vulnerability. Without their leader, the Order floundered, its once unshakable discipline fraying at the edges. Rival factions within the Crusader states seized the moment to undermine Templar authority, accusing them of hoarding resources or prioritizing their survival over the defense of Christendom. The irony was cruel. Armand had spent his early years as Grand Master trying to shore up alliances, only to see those efforts crumble in his absence. Death came slowly in captivity. Unlike Gerard de Riedfort, who met a swift execution, Armand languished for years, long enough to hear of the Templars' retreats, the fall of key strongholds, and the Order's growing isolation from European patrons. By the time he died in 1252, the Holy Land was a shadow of its former self. His legacy wasn't one of triumphs or reforms, but of resilience in the face of despair. Even in chains, he refused to renounce his vows, a final act of defiance that echoed Hugues de Payens' original vision. The Templars now needed a leader who could navigate not just battlefields, but the treacherous politics of a world turning against them. Guillaume de Sonnac stepped into that void. A Provençal knight with a reputation for cool-headed strategy, he understood that the Order's survival depended on more than bravery. It required reinvention. The age of sacred conquest was over. The age of salvage had begun. William de Sonnac faced the impossible with a calm that unnerved even his enemies. When he became Grand Master in 1247, the Crusader states were little more than a scattering of coastal cities clinging to survival. The Seventh Crusade, led by King Louis IX of France, was supposed to reverse their fortunes, but fate had other plans. Sonnac, a seasoned knight from Provence, understood that traditional tactics wouldn't hold against the rising Mamluk forces. His response, a brutal pragmatism that rewrote the rules of engagement. The first test came at Mansoura in 1250. As Crusader forces bogged down in the Nile Delta's marshes, the Mamluks launched a devastating ambush. Sonnac, leading the Templar vanguard, formed a defensive square with dismounted knights, a tactic borrowed from ancient Roman legions but forgotten in medieval warfare. The maneuver bought precious time, allowing the bulk of Louis's army to retreat, but the cost was horrific. A Mamluk arrow found Sonnac's eye, leaving him half-blind yet refusing to yield. Lesser men would have withdrawn. He merely tightened his grip on his sword. 2 months later, at the Battle of Farasca, Sonnac's defiance reached its climax. With the Crusader army surrounded and starving, he orchestrated a last-ditch breakout. Knights whispered later of how he fought with his visor raised, his ruined eye a grotesque badge of honor, slashing through enemy ranks until a Mamluk war axe ended his stand. His death wasn't just a loss, it marked the collapse of the Seventh Crusade. Yet in those final hours, Sonnac had done something extraordinary. His rearguard actions allowed Louis and key nobles to escape capture, preserving the remnants of Christian leadership in the East. Beyond bravery, Sonnac's genius lay in adaptation. He pioneered the use of crossbowmen in mobile units, harassing Mamluk cavalry from a distance. He fortified river crossings with makeshift palisades, turning Egypt's waterways into temporary barriers. These innovations couldn't turn the tide, but they proved the Templars could still innovate even in retreat. As the sun set on the Holy Land, the Order faced an existential question: how to remain relevant when their founding purpose, defending pilgrimage routes, had evaporated. The answer would come from an unlikely figure, Thomas Bayrard, a bureaucrat turned Grand Master who understood that survival meant reinvention. While Sonnac had bought time with blood, Bayrard would secure the future with parchment and ink, relocating the Templars' heart to Europe and transforming them into the medieval world's most sophisticated financial network. The age of castles and charges was fading. The age of vaults and ledgers had begun. Thomas Bayrard inherited an order teetering between irrelevance and reinvention. Elected Grand Master in 1256, he faced a stark reality. The Holy Land was slipping away, and the Templars' original purpose was vanishing like mirages in the desert. Where his predecessors had been battlefield commanders, Bayrard became something far more unconventional, a banker in monk's robes. His genius lay in recognizing that the Order's future wasn't tied to crumbling castles, but to the vaults they'd quietly built across Europe. The shift wasn't smooth. Traditionalists within the Order bristled at what they saw as a betrayal of their martial roots. Bayrard weathered accusations that the Templars were abandoning their vows to become mere moneylenders. Yet his vision was pragmatic. With pilgrimage routes severed, the Order's vast network of preceptories, once way stations for weary travelers, transformed into financial hubs. Noblemen deposited deeds for safekeeping. Kings borrowed against future tax revenues. Even the Pope used Templar agents to transfer funds across borders. Everard didn't just oversee this system, he institutionalized it, creating standardized ledgers and encrypted receipts that were medieval Europe's closest equivalent to modern wire transfers. Criticism reached a fever pitch during the Sicilian Vespers uprising in 1282, when Templar houses in Sicily were accused of hoarding wealth while locals starved. Everard faced a public relations disaster. His response revealed a deft political touch. He ordered the distribution of stored grain, not as charity, but as interest payments to the communities safeguarding Templar assets. The move quelled unrest while preserving the order's financial leverage. Externally, Everard battled perceptions that the Templars had grown too powerful. Rival orders like the Hospitallers whispered to European monarchs about the armed clergy controlling royal debts. Everard countered with transparency, or the illusion of it. He invited audits by bishops, though never revealing full balances, and emphasized the order's role in funding crusade efforts, however diminished. By the time Everard died in 1273, the Templars were no longer just warriors. They were the shadow treasury of Christendom, their influence measured not in acres of land but in lines of credit. The stage was now set for Guillaume de Beaujeu, a leader who would wield this financial might with the precision of a general, proving that gold could be as decisive as steel in the struggle for survival. Guillaume de Beaujeu wore his contradictions like a second cloak beneath the white mantle of the Templars. When he became Grand Master in 1273, the order stood at a crossroads, their military relevance dwindling alongside the Crusader states, yet their financial power growing unchecked in Europe. Beaujeu, a descendant of French nobility with a diplomat's tongue and a spy's instincts, understood that survival now demanded more than valor. It required the careful dance of shadows. The Siege of Acre in 1291 became his defining moment. As Mamluk forces encircled the last major Crusader stronghold, Beaujeu did the unthinkable. He opened secret channels with Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil. Through Venetian merchants and renegade scholars, he negotiated terms that would allow the Templars to evacuate their treasury and relics unharmed. To outsiders, it looked like betrayal. To Beaujeu, it was cold calculus, better to preserve the order's wealth than die for a city already doomed. His pragmatism came at a cost. When Acre's walls finally crumbled, the Templars' rearguard fought with desperate fury, covering the escape of civilians and fellow knights. Beaujeu himself fell in the chaos, struck by a stray arrow as he directed retreating forces. Yet whispers followed his corpse. Had he sacrificed the city to save his own? The accusations stung precisely because they held a grain of truth. In his final years, Beaujeu had transformed the Templars into something Hugues de Payens would scarcely recognize, less a band of holy warriors than a network of bankers and spies, their loyalty to Christendom tempered by survival instincts. The fallout was immediate. Surviving Templars fled to Cyprus, their reputation tarnished by the scent of compromise. Beaujeu's successor, Thibaud Gordon, inherited not just a diminished order but a crisis of identity. With no holy land left to defend, what was their purpose? Gordon's brief reign became a frantic scramble to redefine the order, emphasizing their maritime strength and European holdings. But the rot had set in. By the time Jacques de Molay took the mantle in 1292, the Templars were already living on borrowed time. Molay, a battle-hardened knight from Burgundy, lacked Beaujeu's subtlety. Where his predecessor had navigated the gray areas between faith and pragmatism, Molay saw only absolutes, a fatal miscalculation in an age where kings and popes hungered for the order's wealth. The final act was approaching, and unlike Beaujeu, Molay would have no shadows left to hide in. Thibaud Gordon stepped into leadership like a man trying to rebuild a burning house with one hand while fending off wolves with the other. The fall of Acre in 1291 had left the Templars reeling, their ranks decimated, their reputation questioned, and their very purpose hanging by a thread. Gordon, a veteran commander who'd miraculously escaped the siege, faced a paradox: how to revive an order whose original mission, protecting pilgrims in a vanished kingdom, no longer existed. His solution was as bold as it was desperate. Abandoning centuries of tradition, he began reshaping the Templars into a naval power. The Mediterranean became his proving ground. Gordon redirected funds from crumbling European preceptories to build a fleet of galleys, reasoning that control of the sea lanes could compensate for lost territory. He recruited Sicilian and Catalan sailors, blending their expertise with Templar discipline to create a hybrid force unlike anything the Order had fielded before. Their first test came off the coast of Cyprus, where Gordon's ships intercepted Mamluk supply vessels in a series of lightning raids. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the Templars might carve out a new role as maritime guardians of Christendom's remnants. But Gordon's reforms ran deeper than tactics. He recognized that the Order's rigid hierarchy designed for land battles was ill-suited for naval warfare's fluidity. He decentralized command, granting ship captains unprecedented autonomy to make split-second decisions. To traditionalists, this smelled of heresy. The Templar rule, after all, demanded absolute obedience. Gordon argued that survival sometimes required bending even sacred texts. Then, abruptly, the experiment ended. In 1292, barely a year into his leadership, Gordon fell ill after a routine inspection of his fleet. Within days, he was dead. Some whispered of poison, others of divine judgment for altering the Order's sacred structure. The truth vanished with him, leaving behind only rumors and a power vacuum that threatened to tear the Templars apart. Into this chaos stepped Jacques de Molay, the man fate had chosen to preside over the Order's final act. Where Gordon had been pragmatic, Molay was dogmatic. Where Gordon adapted, Molay doubled down on tradition. The reforms died with their architect, and the Templars, now leaderless in all but name, marched blindly toward their infamous reckoning. Gordon's legacy became one of tantalizing might-have-beens. Had he lived, could his vision have saved them, or was the Order's demise already written in the stars? The answer sank with his body into an unmarked grave, leaving only the waves to whisper what might have been. Jacques de Molay's story is written in fire and defiance, a final act so dramatic it would echo through centuries. When he became Grand Master in 1292, the Templars were already a shadow of their former selves, nomadic, mistrusted, and clinging to the last shreds of their once glorious purpose. Molay, a battle-hardened knight with piercing eyes and a voice that could shake stone walls, refused to accept the slow fade. He spent his early years crisscrossing Europe, begging kings and popes for one last crusade to reclaim the Holy Land. But the world had moved on. Kings like Philippe IV of France saw not holy warriors, but a vault of untapped wealth wrapped in white mantles. The trap snapped shut in 1307. Philippe, drowning in debt from wars and extravagance, ordered the mass arrest of Templars across France on charges so outlandish they bordered on satire, heresy, idol worship, even spitting on the cross. Molay, taken in Paris, endured months of torture so severe his confessions, whatever they were, meant nothing. Bones broken, skin burned, yet something in him remained unbroken. Then came the moment that sealed his legend. Dragged before a public assembly in 1310, the broken old man did the unthinkable. He recanted. With his last strength, he declared the Templars innocent and the confession's lies torn from him by pain. The act was suicidal. Philip, enraged, had him sentenced to death within hours. On a small island in the Seine, as March winds whipped the flames around him, Molay's last words became prophecy. He called Philip and Pope Clement to face divine judgment within a year, and history, with chilling precision, obliged. Clement died a month later of a sudden illness. Philippe followed by November, thrown from a horse during a hunt. Whether curse or coincidence, the timing cemented Molay's myth as a martyr who struck back from the pyre itself. But his true legacy wasn't in curses, it was in symbolism. Molay's refusal to beg for mercy, his willingness to burn rather than betray his brothers, turned him into the perfect emblem of the Templars' complicated soul. Were they saintly warriors corrupted by power, as their enemies claimed, or the last honest men in an age of greed? Molay's ashes left that question smoldering, a puzzle historians and conspiracy theorists would pick at for centuries. The men who shaped the Templars, from Hugues de Payens' humble vision to Molay's fiery end, left fingerprints on history that no king's decree could erase. Their castles still dot the landscapes of Europe and the Levant. Their financial innovations laid groundwork for modern banking, and their myth that outlived them all, morphing into tales of hidden treasures, secret lineages, and shadowy cabals. The truth is simpler and perhaps grander. For 2 centuries, these 25 leaders proved that faith, steel, and sheer audacity could bend the arc of history until the world they knew finally broke beneath them. Their story doesn't end with Molay's pyre. It lingers in every whispered legend, every ruin that still whispers their name, because empires rise and fall, but symbols, those are forever. The Templars didn't just fight battles, they rewrote the rules of war. Picture a medieval battlefield, chaos, clashing steel, knights charging in disarray. Then imagine a unit moving as one, their formations tight, their discipline unshakable. That was the Templar difference. Their military genius wasn't just about courage, it was systemized, from the way they organized their ranks to how they supplied castles in the middle of deserts. Take their battlefield tactics. While other armies relied on individual heroics, the Templars fought like a machine. They pioneered the use of small, mobile units called connois, groups of 10 knights who moved in synchronized strikes, flanking enemies with precision that felt almost mathematical. Muslim chroniclers wrote of their terrifying efficiency, comparing their charges to a wall of iron advancing without breaking, but their brilliance extended far beyond the front lines. The Templars mastered logistics in ways that would make modern generals nod in respect. Their network of preceptories, fortified way stations stretching from Jerusalem to Paris, functioned like medieval supply depots. A knight riding from Antioch to Toledo could change horses at Templar strongholds every 20 miles, his armor repaired and his saddlebags restocked without delay. They even developed an early version of field rations, hardtack biscuits baked twice to last for months, paired with wine vinegar that doubled as disinfectant for wounds. These weren't just conveniences, they were force multipliers, allowing Templar detachments to operate deep in enemy territory for weeks. Perhaps their most enduring innovation was their command structure. The order's hierarchy mirrored the monastic chains of obedience, creating a clarity of leadership that secular armies lacked. At the top, the Grand Master's orders flowed downward through marshals, regional commanders, and sergeants, with none of the feudal bickering that plagued royal armies. This system became the blueprint for Europe's first standing armies centuries later. Even their failures taught lessons. After the disaster at Hattin, later Crusader leaders adopted the Templar practice of maintaining reserve water carriers, a simple idea that saved countless lives in arid campaigns. And then there were the castles, Crac des Chevaliers, saved Tortosa. These weren't just walls and towers, they were masterclasses in defensive engineering. The Templars perfected concentric designs, multiple rings of fortifications forcing attackers to fight through layers of killing zones. Arrow slits were angled to maximize archer coverage while minimizing exposure. Underground cisterns ensured sieges couldn't starve them out. These innovations didn't just protect the Holy Land, they were reverse engineered by everyone from Byzantine engineers to French kings, reshaping European warfare for generations. Yet for all their martial prowess, the Templars' greatest weapon might have been their financial acumen. Those same supply routes that moved troops and bread also transported something more valuable: gold. Their banking system began as a way to safeguard pilgrim wealth, but evolved into a financial network so sophisticated it funded kingdoms. When French knights needed to pay mercenaries in Acre, they didn't ship chests of coins across pirate-infested seas. They deposited funds at the Paris temple and received a coded letter of credit redeemable in Outremer. This system didn't just protect wealth, it made the Templars indispensable to crowns and popes alike. The irony was profound. An order founded to protect the pious with swords became the medieval world's most trusted vault. Their military discipline birthed financial reliability. A knight who'd swear poverty before God wouldn't embezzle your silver. From the deserts of Palestine to the counting houses of London, the Templars proved that logistics and ledgers could be as decisive as lances. Their real legacy wasn't just in how they fought, but in how they thought, turning every challenge, whether a siege or a ledger, into a puzzle to be solved with cold precision and unwavering discipline. As the Crusades waned, it was this financial web, not their swords, that became their most enduring and ultimately dangerous gift to history. Kings who once begged for their loans began eyeing their coffers with hungry calculation. The stage was set for a collision between faith and greed, where gold would prove more lethal than any Saracen arrow. The Knights Templar didn't just safeguard treasures, they reinvented the very concept of wealth. In an era when carrying gold meant risking highwaymen and shipwrecks, the Order's leaders engineered a financial revolution with nothing more than ink and trust. Their system began simply enough. Pilgrims could deposit coins at a Templar house in London or Paris and receive a coded letter of credit to redeem in Jerusalem. But what started as a safety measure soon transformed into something far more powerful, a medieval precursor to modern banking. Take their letters of credit. Far more than mere receipts, these documents were encrypted masterpieces. Names were replaced with symbolic phrases. The Lion of Judah might denote King Henry of England, while amounts were written in Templar cipher, a code so secure that even today scholars haven't fully cracked it. This wasn't just security, it was psychological genius. The very aura of Templar invincibility made their notes as good as gold. Merchants from Venice to Damascus accepted them without question, knowing the Order's vast estates guaranteed repayment. Their financial reach became staggering. When King Louis VII needed funds for the Second Crusade, it was the Templars who advanced him the equivalent of millions in today's currency, not from their own coffers, but by acting as intermediaries, moving money between European nobles and the crown. They even pioneered international currency exchange, offering fair rates between silver marks and Byzantine hyperpera. At their peak, their ledgers held deposits from emperors, popes, and even rival Muslim rulers who trusted Templar discretion more than their own treasurers. But their true innovation was liquidity. Unlike stagnant royal hoards, Templar wealth circulated. Loans to fund a castle in Antioch might be repaid through tithes collected in Provence, then lent again to finance a cathedral in Normandy. This fluidity made them indispensable to Europe's growing economies. Some historians argue their system laid the groundwork for Renaissance banking families like the Medicis, except the Templars did it 2 centuries earlier, without interest charges, bound by monastic vows. Their architectural legacy mirrored this financial brilliance. Just as their banking network connected continents, their castles formed an unbreakable chain across the Holy Land. Take Crac des Chevaliers, a masterpiece of military engineering. Its concentric walls weren't just defenses, they were statements of permanence, built with vaults deep enough to store years of grain and cisterns fed by rainwater channels. These weren't temporary outposts, they were self-sufficient fortresses designed to outlast any siege, much like their financial systems were built to weather political storms. The same precision that balanced ledgers shaped stone, Templar architects employed geometry as meticulously as their treasurers tracked debits. Churches like London's Temple Church used round designs inspired by Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre, while their commanderies blended monastic simplicity with fortress strength. Every archway, every vaulted ceiling served dual purposes: spiritual symbolism and structural resilience. Even in ruin, their buildings whisper of an order that thought in centuries, not seasons. From parchment to parapets, the Templars proved that true power wasn't just in swords or gold, it was in systems. Their ability to move money across borders kept Crusader armies in the field longer than rivals thought possible. Their castles stood firm when others crumbled, and though their order fell, the echoes of their innovations still resonate wherever ledgers are kept or stones are stacked with purpose. The world had never seen anything like them before, and perhaps never will again. The Templars didn't just build castles, they engineered sacred fortresses where every stone whispered of faith and function. Take Crac des Chevaliers, their crowning achievement in modern-day Syria. Perched atop a lonely hill, its walls seemed to grow from the bedrock itself, a labyrinth of killing zones and hidden passages designed to grind attackers into dust. But look closer, and you'll find chapels with vaulted ceilings where Gregorian chants once mingled with the clink of armor. This was the Templar paradox: spaces that could withstand a decade-long siege yet still cradle the quietest prayer. Their architectural genius lay in duality: thick outer walls studded with arrow slits for archers, inner courtyards blooming with medicinal gardens for wounded brothers. Even their staircases spiraled clockwise, forcing right-handed invaders to fight uphill with their swords awkwardly pinned to the wall. Then there's Safed, a lesser-known masterpiece in Galilee. Built on volcanic basalt, its foundations absorbed earthquakes that toppled neighboring forts. The Templars didn't just adapt to the land, they conversed with it. Underground cisterns collected every drop of rainwater, while ventilation shafts funneled desert breezes to cool storerooms packed with grain. Muslim chroniclers grudgingly admitted these castles were pearls set in stone, their design so advanced that when Sultan Baybars finally captured Safed in 1266, he kept the Templar architects alive to replicate their secrets. Across Europe, their commanderies told a different story. The Paris Temple, with its iconic donjon, wasn't just a strongbox for royal treasures. It was a spiritual hub where kings knelt beside lowly sergeants. Its round church, modeled after Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre, reminded visitors that every Templar, from Grand Master to stable hand, served the same sacred mission. These commanderies doubled as economic engines, their sprawling granaries and workshops fueling local trade. In London, the Temple Church's effigies of armored knights still lie frozen in stone, a silent testament to the order's blend of piety and prowess. What set their buildings apart wasn't just scale but symbolism. Templar architects encoded their faith into the very bones of their structures. Octagonal chapels echoed the dome of the rock, while hidden crypts beneath altars safeguarded relics with the same care as gold bars. Even their latrines were marvels of medieval hygiene, draining through cleverly sloped channels that kept diseases at bay, an innovation most European castles wouldn't adopt for centuries. Beyond bricks and mortar, their cultural footprint reshaped Europe's very skyline. Gothic cathedrals like Chartres borrowed their flying buttresses from Templar designs, while the concept of sacred defense influenced everything from Malta's knightly forts to Spain's alcazars. Long after the Order's fall, their architectural DNA lingered in the vaulted banks of Florence and the fortified abbeys of Portugal. The Templars proved that stone could be both sword and sanctuary, a legacy that outlasted even the flames of Jacques de Molay's pyre. Their ruins still whisper secrets today. Walk the overgrown corridors of Toma in Portugal, and you'll find windows aligned to catch the solstice light, illuminating hidden carvings of Solomon's knots. These weren't just buildings, they were living manuscripts, their walls etched with codes and celestial alignments that scholars are still deciphering. The true genius of Templar architecture wasn't in its defiance of time, but in its dialogue with eternity, a language of stone that spoke equally to warriors, monks, and the merchants who funded their holy wars. As the Crusades faded, their structures became something unexpected. Bridges between worlds, Muslim masons hired to repair Templar forts introduced pointed arches to Normandy. Jewish financiers who'd stored gold in Templar vaults brought ledger-keeping techniques to Italian city-states. The Order's physical legacy became a silent catalyst for the Renaissance, proving that even in ruin, their vision of a connected, fortified world endured. The castles may now be tourist stops, but their shadow still stretches across continents, a reminder that the Templars didn't just defend territory. They built the blueprint for modernity itself. The Templars' legacy didn't end with Jacques de Molay's ashes. It ignited a fire in the imagination of the world, burning brighter with each passing century. From the ink of medieval chroniclers to the glow of Hollywood screens, their story has been twisted, glorified, and reinvented to fit the fears and fantasies of every era. Take Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, where Templar knights like Brian de Bois Gilbert became brooding villains, their white mantles stained with ambition and lust. This wasn't just fiction, it was a deliberate reshaping of history, turning complex men into one-dimensional symbols of corruption. The irony, many of these portrayals borrowed from the very accusations Philippe IV used to destroy them, proving that slander can outlive empires. Yet for every villainous Templar, there's a shadowy guardian of ancient secrets. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code catapulted them back into pop culture as keepers of hidden truths, their vaults guarding everything from the Holy Grail to bloodlines of Christ. Never mind that historical Templars were more likely to inventory grain shipments than cryptic parchments. The allure of mystery proved irresistible. Video games like Assassin's Creed doubled down on this trope, casting them as puppet masters of history, their gold and relics pulling the strings of kings and popes. The truth, as always, is far less glamorous. Real Templar leaders spent more time arguing with Italian bankers over loan repayments than chasing arcane artifacts. Conspiracy theories took the myth-making further. Freemasons, occultists, and even UFO enthusiasts have claimed the Templars as their spiritual ancestors, weaving elaborate tales of secret survivals and underground networks. The Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, with its cryptic carvings, became a pilgrimage site for believers convinced its walls hid Templar treasures, never mind that the chapel was built decades after the Order's dissolution. These stories thrive because they tap into something deeper than history, a longing for hidden order in a chaotic world. The Templars, with their aura of disciplined secrecy, became the perfect vessel for that fantasy. But peel back the layers of legend, and you'll find real leadership lessons buried beneath. The Templars' rise and fall wasn't about curses or conspiracies, it was about adaptability. Their early leaders, like Hugues de Payens, understood the power of a clear, unifying mission. Later figures like Thomas Bayrod showcased the necessity of reinvention, pivoting from warriors to financiers when the tides of history shifted. Even their failures, like Gerard de Ridefort's disastrous pride at Hattin, teach us the cost of refusing to adapt. the most enduring myth isn't about lost treasures or secret bloodlines. It's the idea that the Templars were somehow invincible. Their true story is far more human, a reminder that even the mightiest institutions crumble when they forget their purpose. Yet in their 2 centuries of existence, they reshaped warfare, finance, and architecture in ways that still echo today. Their greatest legacy isn't in the whispers of conspiracy theorists, but in the tangible marks they left on the world stone by stone, coin by coin, battle by battle. The Templars didn't need legends to make them extraordinary. History had already done that. The Templars didn't just leave behind castles and legends. They left a masterclass in leadership, written in sweat, blood, and hard-won wisdom. Their greatest lessons weren't in how they wielded swords, but in how they navigated impossible choices. Take adaptability. Hugues de Payens began with 9 knights guarding pilgrims. Within decades, his successors were negotiating with kings and popes. That pivot from battlefield to boardroom wasn't luck, it was foresight. They recognized early that survival meant evolving beyond their original mandate. Modern leaders face similar crossroads, a tech startup outgrowing its garage roots, a centuries-old institution embracing digital transformation. The Templars teach us that clinging to tradition when the world shifts isn't loyalty, it's slow suicide. Resilience, too, was woven into their DNA. After the massacre at Hattin, where Saladin's forces slaughtered hundreds of Templars, the order didn't collapse. Terracus gathered the survivors in Tortosa, rebuilding not just their ranks but their purpose. That gritty determination mirrors today's startups rising from bankruptcy or communities recovering from disasters. The lesson, true resilience, isn't about avoiding failure, it's about how fast you rally when the ground crumbles beneath you. But their most haunting lessons lie in ethical gray zones. Guillaume de Bourdieu's secret talks with the Mamluks during Acre's siege were branded as betrayal by some, pragmatism by others. Was preserving the order's wealth at the cost of a city's fall justified? Modern leaders face equally agonizing trade-offs, layoffs to save a company, compromising ideals for survival. The Templars' history forces us to ask, when does compromise become corruption? Where's the line between flexibility and lost integrity? Yet for all their brilliance, the Templars' downfall holds the sharpest warning. No institution is too powerful to fall. Their fatal flaw wasn't lack of skill or vision, it was overconfidence. By the 1300s, they'd grown so entrenched in their own invincibility that they ignored the gathering storm of royal resentment and public suspicion. Jacques de Molay's refusal to adapt the order's structure or publicly address rumors left them vulnerable to Philippe IV's machinations. In today's terms, think corporate giants toppled by disruptors they dismissed, or politicians undone by scandals they thought they could outlast. Misconceptions still cloud their legacy. They weren't treasure-hoarding mystics or flawless saints, they were human. Their real genius lay in systems, not secrets, in discipline, not destiny. The white mantle didn't make them invincible, it reminded them that every decision carried the weight of something greater than themselves. That's the takeaway for leaders today. Whether you're steering a team, a company, or a movement, the Templar's story whispers that power is fleeting, but the choices you make in its grip echo forever. The legend of the Templars guarding the Holy Grail is a tale spun centuries after their demise, with more holes than a crusader's shield. Medieval chronicles never mention the order possessing Christ's cup. That myth bloomed in the 19th century, grafted onto their story by poets and conspiracy hunters. The truth, Templar leaders were far too busy managing supply lines and loan repayments to chase mythical relics. Their inventories, meticulously recorded, list swords, grain stores, and even kitchen utensils, but not a single chalice of divine provenance. Then there's the persistent whisper of secret rituals. Dark initiation ceremonies, whispered oaths, worship of mysterious idols. These accusations first surfaced during Philip IV's sham trials, designed to justify his theft of their wealth. Modern forensic analysis of trial documents reveals something far simpler. The blasphemous acts confessed under torture were likely misunderstood snippets of their actual rites. When a knight denied Christ during initiation, it wasn't heresy. It was a test of obedience, a medieval stress drill to ensure absolute discipline, the spitting on crosses. Probably symbolic renunciations of vanity, common in monastic orders of the era. Even their supposed treasure hoards crumble under scrutiny. The myth of Templar gold hidden beneath Rosslyn Chapel or Oak Island ignores a key fact. By 1307, their liquid assets had already been seized by Philip's agents. What remained were debts money owed to them by kings and merchants across Europe. Their real treasure was their financial network, a web of trust and credit that evaporated the moment their leaders were arrested. The greatest misconception, though, is that the Templars were invincible. Their downfall wasn't due to lost battles or divine punishment. It was a failure to adapt to shifting politics. While early Grand Masters like Robert de Crayon navigated papal courts with finesse, Jacques de Molay misread the terrain. He dismissed Philip's growing hostility as bluster, assuming the order's sacred status would protect them. That miscalculation cost him his life. Their true legacy lies not in fantasy, but in tangible innovations, banking systems that predated modern finance, castles that redefined military architecture, and a model of disciplined loyalty that still inspires. The myths may glitter, but the reality, that's where the real magic lies. The Templars' downfall wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was a slow collision of royal greed and the Order's own towering success. By the early 1300s, King Philip IV of France, nicknamed the Fair for his golden locks rather than his morals, sat atop a mountain of debt. Years of war with England and Flanders had drained his coffers, while his own mismanagement of the economy left him desperate. His gaze fell inevitably on the Templars, whose financial network now held more liquid wealth than most European kingdoms combined. Here was an order that loaned money to kings yet answered only to the Pope, a dangerous combination for any institution standing between a bankrupt monarch and his creditors. Philip's motives weren't purely financial, though. The Templars had become a state within a state, their autonomy threatening royal authority. When Templar officials refused Philip's demands for special loans or resisted his attempts to place relatives in leadership roles, resentment festered. Earlier Grand Masters like Guillaume de Beaujeu had navigated these tensions with diplomatic finesse, but Jacques de Molay misread the warning signs. His refusal to modernize the Order's structure or publicly address rumors of misconduct left them vulnerable. The Templars' very strengths, their secrecy, their wealth, their independence became the weapons used against them. On Friday, October 13, 1307, a date forever staining the calendar as a symbol of betrayal, Philip struck. Templars across France awoke to royal officers hammering at their doors. Charges of heresy, blasphemy, and sodomy were trumped up, designed to shock the medieval mind and justify confiscating their assets. The trials that followed were masterclasses in judicial theater. Confessions were extracted through torture so inventive it would make even the Order's sternest battlefield enemies wince. Molay himself, after years of imprisonment and suffering, was burned at the stake in 1314. His dying curse reportedly summoning Philip and Pope Clement to God's judgment within the year, a prophecy that eerily came to pass as both died months later. Yet the Templars' story didn't end with Molay's ashes. Their legacy found unexpected resurrection centuries later through Freemasonry's symbolic adoption of Templar imagery. Romantic literature's fascination with their mysteries, and even modern banking's unwitting echoes of their financial systems. Today, organizations from the sovereign military order of the Temple of Jerusalem to historical reenactment groups claim their mantle, though none hold direct lineage. The truth is, the Templars' greatest revival isn't in secret societies or conspiracy theories, it's in the enduring lessons they offer about power, adaptability, and the peril of becoming too indispensable to those in authority. From Hugues de Payens' humble vision to Molay's fiery defiance, their two-century saga proves that even the mightiest institutions aren't immune to the shifting tides of politics and human nature. Their castles may lie in ruins and their treasures long scattered, but their story remains one of history's most potent warnings and inspirations for any organization walking the tightrope between service and power. The ashes of Jacques de Molay's pyre had barely cooled when an unexpected resurrection began, not of the Templars themselves, but of their legend. By the 18th century, Europe's coffee houses buzzed with rumors of secret Templar survivals, whispered among Freemasons and Enlightenment thinkers alike. This wasn't mere nostalgia, it was a full-blown revival, as fraternal orders across the continent began draping themselves in the white mantle's symbolism. The Strict Observance, a Masonic offshoot founded in Germany in 1754, claimed direct descent from the medieval order, complete with coded rituals and elaborate initiation rites. Their ceremonies borrowed liberally from Templar law, swords crossed over altars, vows of poverty reinterpreted as moral allegories. Even the iconic beards, though powdered wigs, had replaced the original's battle-worn scruff. What fueled this resurgence? Partly, it was the romantic allure of chivalry in an age of revolutions. While Voltaire mocked superstition, his contemporaries craved connection to an imagined past of noble warriors. But there was also genuine admiration for the Templars' original innovations. Their financial systems mirrored the emerging concepts of modern banking. Their transnational structure foreshadowed Enlightenment ideals of universal brotherhood. Even their downfall resonated. To reformers, Molay became a martyr to tyranny, his fate invoked in debates about church-state separation. Today, Templar-inspired organizations span the globe, from the charitable Knights Templar International to historical reenactment societies. Some, like Sweden's Order of the Temple, focus on ceremonial pageantry, parading in replica mantles at medieval fairs. Others, such as the Ordo Supremus Militaris Templi Hierosolomatoni, emphasize philanthropy, funding hospitals and disaster relief in the spirit of the original order's mission. The common thread, an unbroken fascination with the 25 leaders who shaped the Templars' golden age, their blend of piety and pragmatism, still offering lessons in leadership centuries later. Walk into any of their chapter houses today, and you'll find portraits of Hugues de Payens beside modern constitutions, Robert de Sablay's battlefield strategies studied alongside non-profit management guides. The rituals may be theatrical, but the reverence for that original brotherhood is genuine. When new members take their oaths, they aren't just play acting, they're stepping into a story that refuses to end, where the choices of those medieval Grand Masters still echo in every vow to serve something greater than oneself. From the vaulted halls of 12th century Jerusalem to the rented banquet rooms of contemporary civic groups, the Templars' legacy endures not in secret treasures or shadowy conspiracies, but in something far more durable, the human hunger for purpose, wrapped in the timeless allure of a white cloak and a red cross. Their true resurrection was never about reliving the past. It was about proving that certain ideals, like certain legends, are simply too potent to stay buried. Centuries may have passed since the last Templar Grand Master drew breath, but their story still casts a shadow long enough to touch our modern world. What is it about these warrior monks that continues to captivate us? Perhaps it's the timeless tension they embody between faith and power, between sacrifice and ambition. Their ruined castles still dot landscapes from Syria to Portugal. Their financial innovations still echo in modern banking halls, and their tragic end still serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. For those hungry to walk in their footsteps, the stones themselves still whisper secrets. Visit the soaring arches of Toma in Portugal, where Templar symbols hide in plain sight among the carvings. Stand in the echoing cavern of the Paris Temple's surviving crypt, where kings once stored their crowns in Templar vaults, or trace the outlines of Safed shattered walls in Galilee, where the Order's engineers defied gravity and siege engines alike. These aren't just tourist stops, they're portals to a world where every decision carried eternal stakes. To truly understand the Templars, though, one must move beyond legends and grapple with their own words. The Rule of the Templars, penned by Hugues de Payens himself, reads like a blueprint for disciplined living. Letters between Grand Masters and popes reveal the delicate dance of medieval politics. Even trial records, twisted as they were by torture, offer glimpses of real men clinging to their vows as the flames rose around them. And then there's Molay's curse, the last act of defiance that sealed the Templars' place in legend. Whether divine judgment or eerie coincidence, the deaths of Philippe and Clement within months of his execution remind us that history has a way of balancing its scales. The true curse may not have been supernatural at all, but the indelible mark the Templars left on our collective memory. Long after their gold was scattered and their castles abandoned, they remain the ultimate symbol of an institution that was both exalted and destroyed by its own greatness. So as the echoes of their story fade, we're left with a question not about them, but about ourselves. What will future generations see when they look back at the legacies we're building today? The Templars' greatest lesson wasn't in how they fought or how they fell. It's in the uncomfortable truth that no power, no matter how sacred, lasts forever. And perhaps that's why we keep returning to their story, century after century. Not for hidden treasures or secret bloodlines, but for the humbling reminder that even the mightiest are, in the end, only human.